Hello again. This is Bob Dennis, having my periodic discussion with Aaron Coffey on various topics, and generally related usually to PEMF, but sometimes ranging further than that. And I guess the first thing we wanted to bring up is the fact that recently a forum was launched on basically on these topics, and it's at fluxhealth.com. Full disclosure, it's being run by a company that I own half of, which is Cortical Metrics. And mostly it's being run by them because they have a pretty large staff of engineers who can do things like run web pages and do a lot of technical support. So it's actually, I will give you a link to the forum down below, and you can go there and you can actually ask Aaron or me or just anybody the questions of interest to you. But in addition to this forum, there is under construction a much larger web page, which will be for crowdsourcing information. It'll all be run by Cortical Metrics. I'll have some input, but basically we're trying to collect information on people's use of PEMF and brain gauge and other different modalities that might be of help to them, and trying to kind of get down to the bottom to some of these things, because I'm not a clinically trained person. I'm a scientist. And, I design things, I measure things, but generally speaking, I don't really deal directly with clinical issues. And apparently from what I've seen, I don't know about you, Aaron, but what I've seen is that oftentimes clinicians don't deal with many of these issues either. Yeah. So the forum is there for people to share their ideas and their knowledge, and then the larger web page, which I will also put a link to down here when it's up, hopefully within the next week, will start to accumulate much more information, scientific information, crowdsourcing information, other things. So we're trying to put together one page called Flux Health that will be one location where you can go to be in a forum, maybe be part of a study, maybe read the results of a study, be part of a crowdsourcing survey, whatever. Anyway, that's kind of what we were going to talk about today, because Aaron and I have been pretty actively involved in the forum since it was launched last week, right?
Yeah, it's really been an amazing forum, quite frankly, because I wasn't really totally in the loop as when you were going to launch it, but I knew you were working on something behind the scenes, sort of.
We didn't. I don't like to make promises ahead of things. Like, I don't like to say, you build it up like it's a new movie or something, a summer release or something. But it's been something I've been working on for a while, and because people have been asking me for a forum for years. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I didn't feel that a forum by itself would be sufficient. But when we're starting to combine a lot of other resources, and there's a lot of things I have in mind, a lot of things I'm planning, and a lot of things other people I have in mind and are planning that I'm not really sure are going to happen, so I won't make any false promises. But I think when you take the forum and you add it to just the basic scientific information we're going to condense and put there, and we're putting a lot of other things like some recent studies that people have done, studies that I've been working on. It should be helpful. It won't give you the simple, quick answers, but it'll give you at least a resource. And also people can, ask Aaron and ask me and ask other people questions. We have several experts who've already agreed to be part of the forum. So if you ask your question the right way, you might get a response from an expert who would actually weigh in. So
I thought the forum was really great, honestly. Logged in and it was easy to use, and I do have some probably more tech experience than the average person. But it was still really user-friendly, I felt like.
Well, we actually, we didn't go cheap on the forum. My request to the people who are running the forum, and I'm sort of hands-off because I don't want to bias things. I'm happy to give my support, my opinions, but I don't want to bias things. But my one request for the forum was, please make a forum that is top-notch, the best the best software for that they could find. And they spent quite a while searching through all the various platforms they could have used. And they used what was kind of, certainly not the cheapest one. It was one of the more expensive ones, especially if you have them do the hosting, right? Yeah. We hosted ourselves on servers, on our own servers at Cortical Metrics, but it turns out, we sort of played with it for a while, and that's the one we chose because it's easy enough to add features and change. And I think you'll find that the forum is not just something that's, fire and forget. It's not like we just put it up because, people were asking for it and then we forget it. We actually are reading this thing every day. You can ask for new topics, and we've moved the topics around quite a bit. And did you know that this is what I was told, the very first day of the forum, we were getting like over 2,000 clicks.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, probably half of it was me. I was sitting here on my phone and I was this page, and I
don't know if they were unique because I was on it a bunch of times too, but 2,000's a lot for just you or me.
People, yeah. There probably is a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
I don't always post, but I'll definitely read. So if there's a lot more people who are even more shy than I am, then you probably do have a whole lot of unique people that were just saying, oh, this is interesting, but they're not really going to go out of their way yet to communicate, either for conscientious reasons, privacy type people, or they're just
right.
Or they just don't know what they would say.
Well, exactly. On the other hand, though, I answer every email that we get for MicroPulse, and I at least I look at them and I decide, how detailed of an answer I can give that would be helpful. Yeah. So it's not like it goes to some robot somewhere. And, so we get hundreds of emails all the time. And every day, almost every day, several times a week at least, we will get these lengthy emails from people saying, I bought your stuff 2 years ago and here's what I tried. And it didn't really help me with this or that. But boy, it was really helpful with this other thing. And then here's how I used it. And this is what I did. And actually, Aaron, you were one of these people, right? You just reach out to us and contact us, and of course, I'm happy to talk to people. So, so what we can do now is we can, right when somebody sends us one of these emails, and we've gotten some remarkable emails about things I don't know anything about, like, prostate cancer and things like that. So what we're doing now is we're encouraging people, because they'll tell me, please share this with everyone, please feel free to use this email. So we've got like 150 of those or something like that, where people have just out of nowhere, unsolicited, said, this has worked so well for me for something.
Wow.
And they're honest about it too, because they'll say, well, I tried it for some other things and it didn't work so well, which is the other half of the discussion, right? It's like, it doesn't work for everything, right? A pair of crutches works really great if you've got a broken leg, but a pair of crutches is not that helpful if you've got a headache, right? I mean, nothing does everything for everyone. So what we have now is this forum. So if you actually have information you want to add that you want other people to see, now we've got a place for it. And we've got different categories, and you can post it there. And it'll be there forever for all to see. And we're leaving it so that it's editable right now. And I think forever, we're going to leave it so that it's editable, indefinitely. So that if you feel like you want to change it or withdraw it or something, you can. And we've had one or two people make statements and then withdraw them, and that's fine. So you don't feel intimidated about it. It's not like you're stuck forever. But if you have something useful that you want to say, you can go to the forum, and I'll write the forum down below. And then in a week or two, I'll add the site for the larger web page that goes with it.
That's neat. So basically it's not lockable, and it's not going to archive in like 2 weeks, like certain WordPress posts or something like that, where it reaches a shelf life, or maybe it still will, but
you can see
they didn't do that, but right now we haven't.
We haven't, and my opinion is that you lose a little bit of something. Somebody might have said something really important, and then they decide to withdraw it.
That's true.
All right. However, I consider a person's opinion and their information to be, their own. And if a person wants to withdraw or change something, they should be able to, right? I mean, you shouldn't feel as if it's forever. So my request to the people who are running the forum is to leave it open indefinitely, because I do know there's a feature where you can set the time, and after a certain time it gets archived and it's kind of locked in stone forever, right? And this forum, I do not believe this forum has to be that way. So I want them to leave it open. So there will be a little bit of confusion. Some people will be answering questions and statements that have been withdrawn, right? So why would I allow that confusion? Why wouldn't I just set it in stone? And the answer is because I want people to be honest, right? And people's opinions change. I mean, look at my opinions have changed 180 degrees many times. So, it's like I'm spinning around in a circle. So I want people to be able to go in and maybe sharpen up what they're saying, say, well, what I really meant was this, or withdraw something if their statement was too strong, either positive or negative, either way. The other thing we did was we made the form so that you can upload images.
Oh, yeah.
Very easily. Now, you can't always do that on forum, but you can do that on our forum. So we basically are putting every resource that we could use for the flexibility of the users into the best forum platform that we could find. So I uploaded a few images already, and you can upload images, and if there's a mistake on them or something, like I always make mistakes, so some little thing here or there. So my whole thing is I like to be self-correcting, right? So when I find a mistake, I go, oops, I tweak it a little bit and try to make it right. So there's those kinds of things that are in there, and eventually, I'm going to upload some images. I'm trying to get a before and after, for example, on my left hip, and I'd love to show, here's what my left hip looked like. I wish I could get the before and after on my lower back problems, but they're
all fixed.
Once they got fixed, they said, hey, there's no medical indication. We can't image you. I was like, boy, you don't want to show what really works, right? So what can I say?
Well, I also felt like a lot of the people that contribute to the forum, they're probably more detailed than we are. I mean, they're just like, maybe because they're more desperately sick than either of us have been, because there's information in there, and I was like, wow, you have tried a lot of different things. And I clicked on one of the links, went to one of the videos that somebody embedded it, and I was like, I started to do it, but it wasn't that I doubted it was going to work. I just didn't have time to finish it. So I was just
right. So it's in limbo. Yeah. Well, I was telling Aaron and I were talking about this earlier, and the discussions get really serious on these things. And I feel quite intimidated actually by some of the things that people have faced, and they face them with, I think, an attitude much more, persistent and durable than I would have. And I'm a pretty persistent person. But I mean, I've gotten, I think, 6 emails this morning already. It's 10 a.m., 10:30 a.m. I've gotten 6 emails, and 2 of them started with, I've been struggling with this problem for 22 or 24, more than 20 years. 2 of them. And they were really serious problems too. Injuries they had a long time ago. And then other people are just like, well, I'm really old. A different person was like, well, I'm more than 70 years old, and I've got this problem. My wife has these problems. And some people send me emails like, I've been through this or that with cancer, and it just goes on forever. And I just don't feel like, it's not that I don't want to answer that. I would love to help them. I just feel like the gravity of the situation is so much that I feel irresponsible.
Yeah. It's almost like I'm afraid to give them false hope. Not that
totally
help them. It's just that it might take longer for them than it did for us, or it might be a totally different, because it's like you were saying earlier, about the crutches. I was thinking about that even before we talked about this with a different type of analogy. Especially it evoked a lot of memories when I was in the forum. So you got one person that says, hey, I tried this and it didn't work, but you find out what they did, and it's like, oh, I put, this particular, so you look at all the variables, this specific protocol, this specific power level, and then am I passively applying it and just leaving it, or am I leaning into it, kind of the method that I've sort of stumbled upon? So there's a lot of variables to it, and it's like, is the place where it hurts the area where it's actually injured, or is it just the area that your body sent the pain because it's been squashed? Kind of like if you put a heavy weight and you press down, if something's underneath and something underneath being pressed down with this weight, well, obviously that's going to be painful down here, but the pressure is up here. And so a lot of different factors that could be connected together. And it's like, well, what if the protocol was better to be, let's say it was supposed to be P2 instead of Omni 8. I highly doubt it's that, probably the other way around. But let's say that it only worked on P2 and it had to be on volume 7, power level 7. And then you had to not put it on your knee, but you had to put it on your hip because your knee was hurting because your hip was actually the point that's injured. Well, people would put it on their knee all day long. They put it on Omni 8. They put it on power level 15 because they're in a lot of pain. They'd wait 6 months and then they'd say, oh, it's not working. And that's exactly what I did. I put A9, put it on my knee, kept it on there for 6 months. I mean, it felt good when I had it on my knee. When I turned it off, pain came back. What was the issue? The bottom of my foot and my hip are all connected. And so
Yeah.
I find different areas and different techniques to apply the unit. And when I actually did, I fixed it. But it actually only took like 2 hours instead of 6 months.
And this is the thing about it. It's highly variable and especially quite deceptive for certain things like sciatica. People are always asking, where do I put it for sciatica? Well, sciatica could be, upstream, much more close, to the spinal cord, some kind of injury that where you're getting this referred pain in a different location, right? So if you're treating the location where you have a feeling, you might not be doing anything to the location where you actually have the injury. So these things require a fair amount of thought. And I talk to a lot of clinicians about this, and they're like, well, okay, if you have condition X, what exactly do I do to deal with it? I got one of those emails this morning. It was an MD. He said, well, I want to know how to deal with this specific thing, and exactly what do I do? And the answer is, I don't know. Everybody responds differently. And so what I've done with the technology is I've tried to take those technical parts of it that could be varied, like the waveform shape, that one's fixed. I don't make that adjustable. I've had a few people say, well, you should make the waveform adjustable. No. Because I know the physics of what I'm trying to accomplish, and it seems to work really well pretty much all the time. So that knob is something you don't have to adjust. You don't want to have too many adjustments. Like when you sit in your car and you just turn the key, brum, 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 your car makes about 28 precise adjustments and timing and fuel injection and all these other things. You don't need to know about that, right? So you need to know all the things that you need to know all the things the car wouldn't know, like when do you accelerate, how long do you stay at a stop sign, when you want to put it in park and when you want to move forward or reverse. So there's certain things in a car you need to be able to adjust because you need to for the individual case, like where you're driving, what you're doing. But then there's certain things in a car that just need to always be the same, or they need to be controlled by the system, and it needs to be something you don't see. And so the problem that I run into with some people in PEMF is they want to have control over every conceivable knob and dial, thinking, well, I'm going to find the magic one. I'm going to find the one magic combination. So I don't know if you saw this. I think you've probably seen it. I actually did a mathematical estimate of the number of different possible ways to adjust PEMF. And the number comes out to, depending on the things you say you want to adjust and how tightly you want to adjust them, 1 quadrillion, I think.
It was so insanely high that there'd be no point in even.
It's like a million billion different ways you could adjust a PEMF device. So, a lot of that has to be done, and you have to say, okay, I'm going to do this kind of waveform, and I'm going to leave it in this kind of frequency range, and I'm not going to try to make a distinction between 7.82 hertz and 7.83 hertz, because honestly, I have never seen any indication that there's a difference between those two specific numbers. Some people say there is, and my response is, I'd love to see the proof. I really would. I'm not saying that just cynically. But the thing is, you can't expect to be able to adjust everything. You can actually calculate that there would not be enough time if you used every minute from the creation of the universe, depending on whether you look at that from a creationist viewpoint or from a Big Bang viewpoint or any other viewpoint. There's not enough time in any historical framework for one person to go through every option on PEMF. There just isn't, right? So you got to be able to narrow it down, right? On the other hand, as Aaron has pointed out, different people respond different ways. And even one person, like some of my injuries respond really well to Omni 8, set on a medium setting. Some of my other, like my back, boom, works great. I just medium power setting, Omni 8, turn it on, back pain's gone, right? My hips are quite different. They take a different kind of a protocol. It requires much more power. It requires much more persistent use, like all the time. And even there's a difference between my two hips, which are presumably degenerating about the same way. My right hip took a few months, sort of a lower power part of the day, and it was fine. It's never come back in like 5 years. My left hip, it was degenerating rapidly. I have to use PEMF all the time. I'm using it right now. maximum power. And about all I seem to be able to do is very slow improvement. At least I'm stopping it from degenerating. And I've been working on it now for about 1.5 years.
Wow.
So yeah, oh yeah. But I'm telling you what, I would rather wear PEMF around every day than, a portable unit than have a hip replacement.
Yeah, that or have to use steroids until you need the replacement.
That's right. And so I mean, without PEMF, I can't walk, I can't stand, I can't go any distance. With PEMF, I can go on 2 or 3, 4 mile hike, no problem, and work all day and walk around and everything. So I'm willing to deal with that inconvenience because I don't think I have a hip replacement or a knee replacement or anything in my future. Maybe I do, but I certainly did when it was first diagnosed.
That's why, since we last spoke, and especially since we last spoke on here, I've been doing a lot of research at a specific individual and various theories that he has, and I really like the complexity of his mind and his theories, and that would be Dr. Jerry Tennant out in Texas. Never met him personally. I called out there and spoke to the receptionist about a month or two ago, and they were some of the nicest people I've spoken with. Sometimes I'll cold call some famous person's office just to see is their reception as good as their public YouTube persona, and most of the time unfortunately I'm disappointed. Usually people are pretty grumpy or grouchy, like not too much, or they just don't care who you are. Not that I care who I am either, but it's just maybe they're not always as welcoming and warm as they appear to be.
Well, I'm pretty grumpy. I'm like famously grumpy, right? And you called our office. We're not famous or anything, but you called us, and my wife said, "Oh, you need to talk to this guy." And I said, "Oh, what's he doing?" And I was like, "Well, it looks like he's doing a lot of crazy stuff. I don't know. Let me see." So anyway, you and I started talking, right? But I mean, yeah, there's people that will not talk to me no matter what. I mean, even if I'm there physically right in front of them, they're just not interested in discussing it. And then there's other people, who are very open. Yeah, you're right. It's quite variable.
I can't speak for Dr. Tennant personally, but he's what I see about him on YouTube and what I experienced with his staff was just, I think it was more than just Southern charm. I think they genuinely desire to help people. And his story is so much like yours. And to some degree, it's like mine. I've read a couple of his books. I had access to Amazon Kindle Unlimited. And so I was able to read most books for nothing for the period that I have access to. So he's got some books that are a little pricier on the side of more of a textbook for like maybe an osteopath or something like that. So it's more expensive. It's what you'd expect to pay if you were, it's like $50 to $100 books.
Oh yeah. Well, let me talk about publishing, right?
Yeah.
I published this book on neuroplasticity and stroke, and my a few months ago called Stroke of Luck, and it's on Amazon. I published it through Kindle Direct Publishing. And it, I was like, well, I'm going to make this as inexpensive as possible for people, but I had some color images in it and everything. So if you actually are publishing something sort of like a textbook, they said, okay, well, the minimum price if you get no money for this thing was like $79.
Well, that explains it. He has a lot of pictures.
Yeah.
So I guess
so if you have a lot of color pictures and stuff, and I think printed out, it was like 600 or 700 pages for this book that I wrote, and a 600 or 700 page book with the color printing on a good quality paper, 6 inch by 9 inch. Yeah, it's. I think they charge about maybe $79, and that would be if I make nothing on it. Like if I make 1 penny on it, it would be 1 penny more than that. So
well,
yeah,
I definitely have paid a lot of money for quality books in the past that I feel like, I don't want them to vanish, or I want to hold on to them or whatever. So I've got a good shelf of books that I felt like were valuable to have, and I just don't want to part with them. And I'm going to buy these eventually in paperback. But I sat down and read one of them. It's about 400 pages. I'm a slow reader, but about 2-3 weeks ago, I just sat down and read it from cover to cover. So it's about 400 pages. It took me about 2 days.
Yeah.
I just read it all the way through, and then I started reading on the other one, and really I learned a lot. And I feel like some of the features and things that we may be missing is that we have the technology, and I've told a lot of people this already. If you found technology from the 29th century, you wouldn't have a clue how to use it. The average person from that era probably would, or if it was really specialized, maybe not, but they would have a better chance of understanding what it's asking you to do as opposed to us.
Sure. Well, imagine you have an iPhone, right? Imagine you have just an iPhone from 2018, 2019, and you hand it to somebody from 1985.
Yeah, it would be totally convenient. This isn't a computer, it has a screen. You touch it. Wow.
Whoa, you touch it and it changes, right? So you can imagine it's not that long. It's within a fraction of a person's lifetime. These things change dramatically, right?
Yeah, I remember I was in middle school. I used to go to the nursing homes, and I always enjoyed doing that, especially seeing a lot of the greatest generation. They were passing away when I was at middle school, so that'd be early 2000s, late 90s.
Yeah.
And, I remember I took the Guinness Book of World Records from like 1998 or 1999 with me to show them all of the inventions that had basically existed, because many of them had been there for 10, 20 years.
Right.
And their minds were clear, but they weren't able to see progression of technology, certainly as it was rapidly growing. So brought in a DVD, and they'd never seen a DVD. And I told them, like, here's a DVD, here's a CD, here's a floppy, and about all they remembered was, a record or a tape track or a cassette or something like that. So even for someone, 20 years ago, technology that is now relatively obsolete or cheap, it was high tech then. So I feel like with MicroPulse, the illustration that I want to use in that is that some of it is the complexity. It's not the device itself is complex. It's just that it might be that most of us don't know a lot about pulsed electromagnetic Faraday induction. It's not a common word on the street that you run into. I always tell people maybe you have a better chance of explaining it like the Qi charger for your phone, wireless chargers. So that's usually what I say. We're running in the last 2 weeks, I've run into probably 3 or 4 people, and I've spent a lot of time on the phone and an email explaining what in the world it is, what it does. And for most listeners that you have now, they probably already know because they might either have one or be considering getting one. But I've had to describe it like using lots of different authors and their theories to try to describe kind of what it is doing in the most simple terms. And I think the most simple terms is it's basically kind of charging your batteries, so to speak, which is one of the paradigms that I got from Dr. Tennant. And Dr. Tennant's really fascinating because he's actually, we watch his videos online. They're quite long, longer than ours, because usually he's giving it like a conference lecture to doctors and saying, hey, here's what you're missing in the education you're getting from the standard allopathic field. And it's almost like re-education, but the guy is a freaking genius. He was a world-class eye surgeon. I think he graduated from high school at age 16, and very credentialed individual. And he became ill through practicing early LASIK or PRK or something like that, whatever it is, back in the 90s. Basically, I think his story, he told that he was performing eye surgery on somebody who had a communicable disease, but only through like blood or various other transmissions, not from like touching them. And it came out of the eye, and he inhaled it and got encephalitis or something. And he was pretty much conked out 3/4 of the day for years. And so he would wake up and read everything he could to try to figure it out and talk to people. Then he'd go to sleep again. And after he woke up and finally was able to reverse his problem, which I think basically everyone thought it's just time to go die. Because I don't know how old he was, but it probably was in his 50s or 60s by then. So he had to stop practicing, at least for a while, if not indefinitely, for that particular area that he was credentialed. And then he began to explore other avenues, kind of like you did, kind of like I have, but he did it professionally, I believe. So he studied acupuncture, he studied PEMF, he studied what I would say is more like the Rife machine type technology, the idea of using targeted frequencies to destroy disease, which was really a fascinating idea that lots of people are interested in it, but nobody really knows how to do it because it's not real. It's a fascinating concept that I think eventually will be back in the stream of things, but I think it'll be a while before it's mainstream.
Well, I think you're right. Way back when I was in graduate school, like 30 or 35 years ago, one of my closest friends, his father, was one of the engineers who designed the computing systems for the Apollo space program. So really, really smart man, really, really smart. And I was in graduate school as a friend of the family, and I was telling him one of the things I wanted to do. And one of them was, identifying and then going after pathogens using, radio frequency effects on people's blood and everything. And he was kind of skeptical. He's like, well, I don't know, about that. Good luck with good luck with it, right? So it's something I've been thinking for a long time, and I view the PEMF that I'm doing now, I view it differently than that.
Yeah, I think
so. I think when you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, not everything that's electromagnetic in its origin is necessarily right on the spectrum. Like, for example, the color red, everybody says, oh, all the colors of the spectrum, the color blue. Well, okay, where does the color brown fit, or the color pink? True. And the answer is that actually that's a combination of different peaks on the spectrum. So you won't find brown or pink anywhere on the spectrum. You might think you're seeing pink, but you're not. You got to look kind of closely. And pink is like, a combination of red and the sort of the violet end of the spectrum together. Either one by itself doesn't have pink in it. So you have to look at the electromagnetic spectrum as much more complicated than just one point along a line, right? It's much more complicated than that. And it's just like chemistry, right? Where you're talking about one chemical and then another chemical, and then maybe how these things interact and how they interact with biology. And so I think that, when you're talking about PEMF, you're really talking about something at the level of chemistry. So it's impossible to say you need to use chemicals, or chemicals work, or the chemicals don't work, or chemicals are safe, or chemicals are dangerous. You need to be really specific about what you're talking about. And so a lot of these frequency-based methods like Rife and everything, I think there's really something to them. It's just that I think they're quite different in their mechanism of action from the type of PEMF I'm working on. And so like my take on PEMF would be very different from Jerry Tennant and some of these other geniuses that, have gone before me, because I'm looking at it sort of as a biophysicist. I'm saying, well, I'm not looking necessarily at the clinical mechanisms, but I'm looking at sort of the biophysics of why would it work? And so I've sort of zeroed in on this narrow range of PEMF that seems to be really effective seems to really work for a bunch of things. And then, of course, very similar to Jerry Tennant and some of these other people, I had a really serious problem. In my case, it was my back was degenerating, right? So I needed a solution for that. And that's what I've been focusing in on. If it works for other things, that's awesome. That's great. If it can help somebody with their sleep or with some other serious problem like cancer, I don't know anything about either of those two. That's what the forum is for. Hopefully you'll go there if you have those questions. I don't know anything about it. All I'm trying to do is zero in, so my take, I guess my contribution to PEMF is a little bit different than everybody else's. And I don't, and so I see the mechanisms differently. Like I think Jerry Tennant and a lot of people talk about recharging the cells and recharging them like batteries and things like that. And that certainly may be true. And it certainly may be true, especially for other kinds of PEMF as well. And the mechanism I'm looking at is different. I'm sort of like trying to move charge around, because I know that a cell can detect when charges are moving across the membrane. That's well known. That's well-established science. But I also think that cells can detect when charges move along the membrane, not across it, but along the membrane. And that's exactly what you would see during normal activity, like exercise and walking, because you're kind of squeezing and then releasing, squeezing and releasing the tissue. So fluid's flowing and flowing back, flowing. And the fluid has charges, it has ions. And those ions wouldn't be flowing necessarily into and out of cells, but they'd be flowing across cells. And that flow of ions, I think, is extremely important to the health and the remodeling of bone and muscle and tendon tissues like that. It seems to also, we see this biologically, that signals are conserved. So sometimes a type of signal will be really good for something, and then your cells incorporate that into some completely different mechanism. So I think this mechanism of detecting charge movement between cells, but not across membranes, and also charge movement within a cell and across its organelles, which is not well studied at all, but clearly that's happening. So if you use PEMF and you have an organelle, or something like a nucleus that has a membrane, PEMF would cause charge to cycle around the nucleus, for example, right? And that could simulate the mechanotransduction of movement of the rest of the cell. So you see, my take on it is quite different from everybody else's, but frankly, it's such a huge and complex field. I think there's a lot of room for a lot of different viewpoints, right?
Yeah, and kind of that's oversimplification in my mind for trying to grasp all that you've said versus all that other people have said is I kind of view it like AC and DC as far as current goes. I feel like the method that you and a lot of other scientists take is a very direct current method. It's in the allegorical sense. It's like it's a very direct, focused, very methodical, very clinical, very repeatable, studyable type of method where it's just a one-to-one, if I do this, cause and effect type of method versus the other people out there, more of an alternating current world in a allegorical sense where the meridian systems are pathways in the body. They're very near the surface of the body, and if you do this it affects this, and it's just kind of all woven together. I do think both exist, and I don't know all the details, but early on I did have an acupressure done that the best way I can describe it is it took the idea of rife. So it wasn't rife, it was actually very Eastern in nature, but it was an Eastern person who had come to the US, gotten sick, and had Western medical, optical, how is the right word? Diagnostic equipment, top quality diagnostic equipment done on them while acupressure was done on. This is like 30 or 40 years ago. And they saw changes when they did certain things versus others. And so this person just continued to formulate their method. And it was unlike what you would see in either the East or the West because they weren't Luddites. So they were in favor of using technology, but they're also trying to use the pathways and the maps of the East and try to put two and two together. And so when I had this done, I was extremely skeptical because there I am in grad school really sick, and I'm thinking probably all I need is probiotics, but it doesn't really make it any better long term. So I go and have this done, and I'm holding frequency, I don't know the right word. There's some French guy, he was a Nobel Prize winner. The establishment really didn't like him, so I think he ended up going to China. But basically, he had shown that he could induce charge into water, probably structured water or something like that, and would maintain the frequency of the object that he had intended to induce the frequency into. Real out there stuff. But basically, I was holding multiple frequencies in these vials, and I had acupressure done. And the very next day, every time I had this thing done, I'd get better and better. So when I started out, I was told I was lactose intolerant, had all these food sensitivities. I was getting bronchitis and walking pneumonia every year. 3 treatments later, it never came back. And that was 7 years ago. So Now I can eat anything I want, breathe, go outside and pollen season, no more Zyrtec, no more Claritin, no more nothing. I literally haven't had any kind of allergy medicine for 9 years now.
That is remarkable. That's absolutely remarkable. And in my worldview, that kind of stuff, there's something to it. And I guess what I keep telling people is, there really seems to be something to it. And many of my friends practice medicine that way in Ann Arbor and here in Chapel Hill and around the world. There's friends of mine who practice medicine that way, and they get really good results. And, much of the time for things that were not getting better for people, they were just getting worse. All of a sudden they're getting better. And sometimes the problem goes away and doesn't come back. So my opinion is on all of that. Does it work? Simply as an observer, I would have to say, boy, there's something to it, right? I would like to see better studies done. And so one of the purposes of our forum is to get like-minded people together and then actually put together studies where we can actually say, to different practitioners and different people in different places, okay, you're going to try this, and these people have this certain prognosis. What are the outcomes really? What percentage of people really respond? And trying to make it something where a person could take something like what you were saying and saying, okay, well, what percentage of people really, if they give that a try and they're open-minded about it, what percentage of people really benefit? And to me, it'd be fascinating to know. Yeah. Is it 50%? Is it 90%? Right?
Well, the neat thing is I had it done for a year, and I knew I was going to move away, and so I begged the person who did it, the doctor, a friend of mine. I said, "Hey, look, I'm moving away. This is so uncommon. I guarantee you, I'm not going to find anybody who knows how to do this." And so he taught me how to do it, and
Wow.
I've learned how to do it. I have done this to other people as well, family,
Wow.
saying, "Hey, I've always had this allergy to this," and I met this guy about 5 years ago, and he said, I've never been able to get into a swimming pool with the chlorine because every time I did, I'd break out in hives. So he said,
Ah.
imagine the stress of being a little kid, go to a pool party, you can't get in the water, you just got to watch everybody else swim and wait for them to eat pizza. And I said, well, hey, look, no promises here, but I can try this and show you how it works, because as I was told, it's either going to work or it's not going to work at all. And so we did this, and then like a week later, he said, dude, you won't believe this. He's like, I'm 25 years old. I just got into a swimming pool for the first time in my life and I had no trouble at all. I'm like, okay. So just
How do you argue with that, right? You can't say that it doesn't work because the person got relief, right?
Yeah, and I got accused of being Rain Man, because after that, here I am buying a order of test tubes from Amazon, and then collecting the pollen from different species, thinking, well, I'm just going to get a little jar and collect pollen from every tree because I'm not sensitive anymore. And I don't even use the word allergy. I would use the word hypersensitivity. But the reason I mention all this is because I do think that when I've used micropulse, I use it in conjunction with this, which is not how these people use it. In fact, from what I've learned about the original discoverer of this method, they have very specific parameters for what they would consider their method. And even the method that I learned is considered not their method. So when I add micropulse to it, we're so far removed from what the original people said that it's not even the same thing. So all the studies you are going to see with the original discoverers are not going to be related to this at all, because I'm using PEMF on acupuncture meridians while doing a very specific different treatment approach. I use the word treatment, but wellness approach that really, honestly, you could go with your own hands and nothing else and go to any part of the world, eat the food, get sick, do this with nothing but your own hands, pressure points, very specific. So it could never be accidental. You couldn't do this on your own. I mean, you would have to know exactly what you're doing or it wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. And then 2 hours for about a day and a day and a half, you're having a massage 9 specific pressure points. So it's not like someone's going to come along and say, hey, I figured this out on my own. I don't know how this person did figure it out, but I know that their sources are like 30 pages long. So there's a lot of research that the original discoverer went into. And with micropulse, I think that it's even more enhanced, because generally you're talking massaging 9 pressure points every 2 hours for 25 hours. And now when I use micropulse, I only have to do it 2 or 3 times, and then it just is considerably more powerful.
Well, this brings up a topic we discussed once or twice, I think, already, but it bears repeating, which is the topic of synergy and how things work together, right? I mean, this is true in your diet. This is true in activity. This is true in interventions that people do. And one of the things that's really hard to find in the medical literature, I would never say it's completely absent because it's not. I can think of many examples, but it's hard to find papers where there are studies where multiple things were controlled and studied. Because like if you want to say, does intervention A help back pain? Then your study is you've got a group that uses intervention A, you got a group that does not. So you've got a negative and a positive. And then you basically have 2 groups and that's it. But if you're saying, well, you've got to use intervention A and or intervention B, right? Now, how big is your study? Well, you've got a group that didn't use anything. Then you've got a group that used only intervention A. Then you got a group that used only intervention B. And then you've got a group that used only intervention A plus B, right? Mm-hmm. So now, by just simply adding one thing, you're increasing the number of studies by quite a lot. And if you add a third thing like C, you've got a huge, unmanageably large study now where you've got groups of just A and C or just B and C or just you know, and this is true when you start to do things like different dosages too. This is why you don't tend to see a lot of studies that have nice smooth dose response curves. They do exist, but they're very expensive because you've got to be looking at different dosages. And then if you're looking at different times, right?
Yeah.
Then, you know, like something that might help back pain for 2 weeks, like a back surgery, if you study it 2 years out, you might be looking at failed back syndrome instead of, you know, positive outcome, right? So it's very, very hard to find studies that have multi-dimensional depth to them. And as a result of that, that's a deficiency of the way that we do science. And there are statistical ways to try to sort that out, but almost nobody does that. And so as a result, scientifically in health and medicine, we tend to think of things very, like you were saying, discretely, you know, this, yes or no, this, yes or no. And we miss, almost entirely, we miss synergistic effects. We miss the, you know, the effects of combining things together and doing them for longer times, you know, or doing them in very small or very large amounts. Like the arguments about vitamin C, where most of the studies, they just didn't have an adequate dosage, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So,
how about we break this up? And I know people are probably been listening to us for about 50 minutes or so
yep.
now. How about we pause and we'll come back in 5 minutes from our perspective and probably 2 seconds for theirs.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and stop here and we'll see you back in a couple of minutes. All right. See ya.